Hello, everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we'll discover why one broken bowl made Jack push Tu Tien away, and how Mother Loy uncovered the fear he could not confess. Subscribe so you never miss our next story. Early light slipped through the window and laid a pale stripe across the silent kitchen. Jack stood at the wooden table, trying to cut vegetables with a hand that had not stopped trembling. He had risen while Tu Tien slept, determined to cook the dish that once made her smile during their hardest days. Steam began lifting from the pot when the bowl tilted from his fingers. The sharp crash tore through the quiet house. Tu Tien ran in barefoot, her hair still loose from sleep. She found Jack gripping the table, his knuckles drained of color, broken porcelain scattered around him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, moving closer. Jack stepped back at once. "Do not look at me like that." Tu Tien stopped. "Like what?" Jack bent to collect a piece. Strength left his fingers, and the shard struck the floor again with a small, merciless sound. Tu Tien knelt, but Jack caught her wrist. "I can do it." His voice was low, cold, almost unfamiliar. She looked at the hand holding her, then at the fear he was trying to bury behind a rigid face. Slowly, she pulled free. "All right, I will let you do it." She walked away without crying or accusing him. Her silence wounded him more deeply than anger could have. The unfinished meal kept steaming. Outside the doorway, Mother-in-law stood motionless with a basket of vegetables against her hip. She understood that her son was not angry with his wife. Jack hated the instant his body betrayed the promise he had built his identity around, that no matter what happened, he would always be strong enough to protect the woman he loved. Mother Loy entered after Tu Tien left. Clean ingredients, a crooked knife, and Jack's handwritten recipe covered the table. "Were you making this for Tu Tien?" she asked. Jack gathered the broken pieces with his stronger hand. "I promised that I would cook our first meal after coming home." Mother Loy did not help him collect them. She only asked, "Do you want to make your wife happy, or prove that nothing has changed?" Jack went still. On the veranda, Tu Tien's phone rang. Someone from the farm said work was waiting. She quietly answered that she would stay home several more days. Jack heard every word. He saw the scratches across her hands and remembered how she had abandoned every obligation to remain beside him during his coma. Gratitude tightened into fear. When Tu Tien returned, the floor was clean. Jack spoke as though discussing an ordinary arrangement. "Go back to the farm tomorrow. Mother can stay with me." Tu Tien placed her phone down. "I want to be here. I do not need you to sacrifice anything else." She waited for him to meet her eyes, but he stared into the steaming pot. "Or do you no longer need me?" Jack's fingers tightened around the kitchen cloth. He wanted to admit that he needed her more than ever, yet the truth caught behind his pride. He turned away. Tu Tien gave a faint nod, as if his silence had answered her. Mother Loy watched the space opening between them, and understood that the accident was no longer the greatest danger facing their marriage. Jack's fear was quietly teaching Tu Tien to doubt the place she held beside him. Afternoon settled slowly over the roof. Tu Tien stood beside the bed, folding her work clothes for the next morning. She flattened each crease as though busy hands could steady her heart. Jack watched silently near the window. The zipper closed. Tu Tien lifted the bag, passed him, then stopped. "When I no longer wanted to live, you never asked whether saving me exhausted you." Jack lowered his eyes toward his weakened legs. She continued, "Now I choose to stay. Why are you deciding for me?" "Because I know the price of living entirely for another person," Jack replied, his voice roughening. "I wanted to lead you away from the days when you erased yourself to please everyone. I will not become the person who pulls you back there." Tu Tien turned fully toward him. "So you believe I am here from duty?" Jack searched for an answer less painful than the truth, but none existed. "I do not know." Something changed in her face. Anger disappeared, leaving a quiet, profound disappointment. "You believed in me when the world called me worthless. Yet now you do not believe I know whom I love." She walked on to the veranda. Jack pushed himself upright to call her name, but strength deserted his knees. Gripping the doorway, he watched her disappear around the side of the house. Her bag remained beside the bed. She had not left. Even so, Jack understood that his doubt had pushed her somewhere farther than any road could carry her. For the first time after the accident, he feared losing something no doctor could restore, the trust with which Tu Tien had finally offered him her whole heart. Mother Loey found Jack in the kitchen as darkness gathered. He bent to collect the final shard, although the floor was already clean. She took an unbroken bowl, placed it in her son's hands, and said, "Please carry this to the table for me." Jack understood the test. Holding it with both hands, he crossed slowly. After several steps, his fingers began trembling. He set the bowl down too hard before it could fall. Mother Loy offered no soothing words. "You are angry with your hand. Why are you hurting, Tu Tien?" Jack leaned against the table, breathing heavily. "I fear she will look at me and remember only the man who rescued her. If I cannot do anything anymore, I will never know whether she remains from love or gratitude." Mother Loy studied her son. At first, Tu Tien could not look directly at you. She accepted everything, lowered her head, and thanked you. Now she argues, refuses, and tells you when you are wrong. A woman repaying a debt does not behave that way. Jack looked toward the dark yard. "She is gone." Mother Loy shook her head and opened the back door. Beneath the shelter, Tu Tien was washing vegetables beside a basin. The ingredients had been divided into 2 equal portions. She wiped her eyes against her shoulder and kept working. "She is not staying to nurse a patient," Mother Law said. "She is staying to be your wife. Those are different things." Jack watched Tu Tien beneath the warm lamp. For the first time, he saw that pride had become a locked door, leaving the woman he loved outside while he suffered alone behind it. Jack stepped outside as Tu Tien placed vegetables into a basket. He called her name, but the apology would not form. Tu Tien carried 2 portions inside, placing one before each of them. "You do not need to cook for me," she said. "Teach me." Jack looked at the knife, then at his hand. "It will not taste like it did before." Tu Tien lit the stove. "Neither of us is the same after the accident." Her gentle voice finally persuaded him to sit. He explained how to slice vegetables, control the flame, and recognize the spice's fragrance. Tu Tien followed without pretending to be skilled. Her pieces were too thick, and she added ingredients in the wrong order, forcing Jack to correct her several times. When the broth boiled, Jack reached for the ladle. His fingers trembled again. Tu Tien moved closer, then stopped with both hands against her chest. "May I help?" Jack studied her. In the silence, he realized she was not asking from pity. She was returning the choice he had taken from her. Slowly, Jack offered his wrist. Tu Tien supported it from beneath while allowing him to stir. Steam softened their faces. She accidentally added another spoonful of salt. Jack tasted the broth and grimaced. Alarmed, Tu Tien asked whether it could be saved. He laughed, briefly, but honestly. Mother Loy heard that sound from the corridor and quietly walked away. In the kitchen, Jack was no stronger than he had been moments earlier. Yet for the first time, he no longer needed to pretend that recovery was complete. Tu Tien remained beside him without taking his work, his dignity, or his hope away. The meal was ready when darkness covered the garden. Mother Loy set 3 pairs of chopsticks down and left the silence to the couple. Jack took the ladle to serve Tu Tien first. He lifted the bowl. Halfway to her place, his wrist began shaking. A drop of broth slipped over the rim. Mother Loy started to rise, but Tu Tien gently shook her head. She supported the bowl from beneath while Jack held the top. Together, they lowered the food before her. Their fingers touched, breaking Jack's final defense. "I am afraid you remember only the man who rescued you," he said. "I fear that when you see me now, you will remain because you are grateful." Tu Tien did not answer immediately. She moved vegetables into Jack's bowl, as he once saved the best for her. "When you gathered medicine, cooked, and gave me a home, you never demanded repayment." She raised her eyes. "Why must my love become a debt?" Jack lowered his head. Tu Tien placed her hand beside his rather than covering it. I do not love you because you are always strong. I love you because, when I was weakest, you never made me feel useless. Please do not do that to yourself." Tears fell onto the back of Jack's hand. He left them there. After a long silence, he asked, "Will you help me practice again tomorrow?" Tu Tien nodded. It was the first time Jack had willingly asked her for help. Mother Loy looked down at her meal, hiding tears of relief. Her son had not recovered his strength, but he had finally stopped measuring love by what he could provide alone. Mother Loy tasted the dish, keeping a stern expression that worried Tu Tien. "It differs from Jack's earlier meal," she said. Tu Tien glanced at the salty pot. "Does it taste bad, Mother?" Mother Louise shook her head, her eyes still wet. "That meal belonged to Jack. This one belongs to a family." Jack smiled. They ate slowly, ignoring the broken bowl. The next morning, Jack did not rise secretly. He called Tu Tien in before placing the kettle on the table. She stood nearby, giving him space and waiting. Jack attempted to pour tea. The stream wavered, spilling across the wood. He looked at the water, then at his wife. Tu Tien did not rush to take the kettle. She offered him a cloth. Jack laughed and wiped up his own spill. "I cannot promise that I will recover quickly," he said. "I cannot promise that I can do everything," Tu Tien replied. Jack opened his hand upon the table. No bowl needed steadying, and no strength needed proof. Tu Tien placed her hand in his. "But we can learn again together." Mother Loy entered, noticed their joined hands, and pretended to need something outside. Jack called her back. He divided the day honestly. Tu Tien would return to the farm, Mother Loy would tend the garden, and Jack would rest and exercise. Nobody had to surrender a life to prove love. Sunlight reached 3 cups, arranged beside one another on the veranda. The house appeared peaceful, no longer built from silence. It rested on truth, shared work, and courage without pretense. Jack squeezed Tu Tien's fingers. Accepting that protection could also mean allowing someone trustworthy to remain close.